It started with a sound that didn't belong. Not a shout, not a siren, not the familiar, droning announcements that were the lifeblood of JFK International. It was the sound of a deep, guttural growl that sliced through the terminal's chaotic symphony, making hundreds of people in the TSA line freeze mid-step. Officer David Miller felt the vibration of that growl travel up the leather leash, a live wire of pure, unadulterated intent. Beside him, Max, his 7-year-old German Shepherd partner, a dog known for his iron-clad discipline and stoic calm, was transformed. His body was coiled like a spring, every muscle screaming, his eyes locked on a single, unassuming lavender suitcase gliding down the conveyor belt. This wasn't his trained alert. There was no telltale sitting posture for explosives, no frantic scratching for narcotics. This was something else entirely, something primal. Before Miller could even utter a command, Max launched himself forward. It was a blur of black and tan fur, a missile of instinct. He cleared the small gap between them and the conveyor belt, his powerful jaws clamping down not on the body of the suitcase, but on its handle, wrenching it from the moving track with a force that sent it skidding across the sterile floor. The chaos that erupted was instantaneous. TSA agents yelled, passengers gasped and stumbled backward, and a woman with wide, terrified eyes cried out, "My bag! What is he doing to my bag?" No one understood what was happening. Why was this highly decorated K9, a dog with a flawless record, suddenly acting like a wild animal over a simple piece of luggage? What could he possibly sense inside that was worth breaking years of meticulous training? Stay till the end, because this incredible story will leave you speechless. What was hiding inside that lavender suitcase would challenge everything they thought they knew about instinct, loyalty, and the silent language of heroes. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Max, heel. Stand down. Miller's voice was a steel whip, a command that had stopped his partner in the face of roaring fires and armed suspects. But this time, it was as if he hadn't spoken at all. Max ignored him. He planted his paws, his powerful neck muscles straining, and refused to let go. He wasn't shaking the bag, not trying to destroy it. He was holding it, protecting it, claiming it. Miller couldn't tell. All he knew was that the dog he'd raised from a pup, the partner who knew his thoughts before he did, was now a stranger to him, driven by a force he couldn't comprehend. The owner of the bag, a woman who looked to be in her late 30s with tired lines around her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy bun, pushed through the forming circle of security. "Get him off. Get your dog off my property," she shrieked, her voice cracking with a potent mix of fear and anger. Her name, Miller would soon learn, was Clara. "Ma'am, please step back," a TSA agent said, putting a firm hand on her shoulder. Miller knelt, trying to get eye level with his partner. "Max, look at me, boy." He put his hand on Max's powerful head, feeling the tremors running through him. The dog's amber eyes, usually so full of intelligence and calm focus, were now wild with a desperate urgency. He flicked his eyes from the suitcase to Clara, then back to Miller, and let out a low, frustrated whine from the back of his throat. It was the sound of a creature trying to scream a warning in a language no one around him could understand. This was wrong. All of it. Miller's mind raced. An explosive would have triggered a passive sit. Narcotics, a frantic scratch. There were trace scents of food, maybe, but nothing that would provoke this kind of extreme, protocol-shattering reaction. He knew his dog. He knew every twitch of his ear, every subtle shift in his posture. And this posture, this raw, unwavering focus, wasn't in any training manual. It was something deeper, something that came from the soul of the animal itself. The TSA supervisor, a man named Henderson with a permanently skeptical expression and a clipboard that seemed surgically attached to his hand, stomped over. "Miller, what in the hell is going on? Control your animal. You're holding up the entire checkpoint." "I'm trying, sir," Miller said, his voice tight with frustration. "He won't release. Something's not right." "Not right." Henderson scoffed, gesturing at the chaotic scene. "You think? Run the bag again. And get that dog off of it before he causes a panic." Clara was becoming more and more agitated. "There's nothing in there. I swear. It's just clothes for my trip. Personal items." You have no right to do this. Her voice was rising, bordering on hysterical, and her eyes darted around as if looking for an escape route. Her panic was a red flag, but a flag for what? Guilt? Or just the sheer terror of having a 100-pound German shepherd latched onto your belongings in the middle of a crowded airport? Miller stood up, placing himself between Henderson and his dog. With all due respect, sir, something in that bag is making him do this. I've never seen him act this way. Not once in 5 years. He remembered a winter 2 years prior, a blizzard that had buried the state in 3 feet of snow. A 7-year-old girl had wandered from her home, and after 12 hours, the search was turning from rescue to recovery. Scent trails were gone, buried under the fresh powder. But Max, off-leash, had led Miller on a 2-mile trek in the opposite direction of the main search party, straight to an abandoned hunting cabin. He hadn't been following a scent. He had just known. He'd stopped at the cellar doors, buried in snow, and began to dig, whining that same, desperate whine he was making now. They'd found the little girl inside, huddled but alive. The official report called it a miracle of scent work in impossible conditions. But Miller knew better. It was intuition. It was a connection to the world that humans had long since forgotten. And he was seeing it again now, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of an airport. Intuition doesn't hold up in a report, Miller, Henderson snapped, as if reading his mind. Protocol does. And protocol says your dog has malfunctioned. Get him off the bag, or I'll have him decertified by the end of the day. Is that clear? The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. Decertified. It meant Max would be stripped of his badge, taken from the field, taken from Miller. They would be separated. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind from Miller's lungs. He looked from Henderson's angry, impatient face to Clara's tear-streaked, terrified one, and then down to Max. His partner. His friend. The dog who had saved his life on 2 separate occasions without hesitation. And in that moment, Miller knew whose side he was on. Let's run the bag again, Miller conceded, his voice low. But he stays with it. It was a compromise Henderson didn't like, but the crowd of onlookers, many now filming with their phones, forced his hand. He barked orders, and 2 agents carefully slid a large plastic bin under the suitcase, lifting both the bag and the dog attached to it, and placing the entire thing back on the conveyor belt. Max didn't flinch, didn't loosen his grip for a second. He rode with the bag back into the humming maw of the X-ray machine, a silent, furry sentinel. The air in the small security office was thick with tension. On the monitor, the familiar green and orange shapes of the suitcase's contents resolved into view. Everyone leaned in. Henderson, Miller, 2 other TSA agents, and Clara, who was hugging herself so tightly her knuckles were white. They watched as the image scrolled by. Sweaters. A pair of jeans. A toiletry bag filled with harmless plastic bottles. A pair of shoes. There was an organic mass near the bottom, but it was indistinct, easily mistaken for a packed lunch or a block of cheese. There were no wires, no circuits, no suspicious densities, no hidden packages. Nothing. Henderson let out a triumphant, frustrated sigh. There. See. Nothing. It's a bag of clothes. Your dog is chasing ghosts, Miller. He turned to Clara, his tone softening slightly. I apologize for the delay, ma'am. We just had to be sure. Clara just nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. But were they tears of relief? Or something else? It can't be nothing, Miller whispered, his gaze locked on the screen. He was looking at the evidence, the cold, hard data from the machine, and it was telling him one thing. But the living, breathing evidence was still attached to the real bag just a few feet away, and Max was telling him something completely different. Who do you trust? The machine or the heartbeat? It's over, Miller, Henderson said, his voice firm. Order your dog to release the bag so this woman can make her flight. The pressure was immense. His career, his partner's future, the integrity of the entire K-9 unit were all on the line. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to back down, to chalk it up to a bizarre fluke, a misfire in Max's K-9 brain. He could apologize, smooth things over, and live to fight another day. But then he looked at Max. The dog had been dragged, scanned, and surrounded by stressed, angry humans, yet his resolve had not broken. He was panting now, his grip surely tiring, but his eyes were still locked on Clara, and they held an expression of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He wasn't accusing her. He was pleading with her. And that's when Miller knew. He couldn't back down. This was a test, not of Max's training, but of his own faith. "No," Miller said, his voice quiet but firm. Henderson's head whipped around. "What did you just say?" "I said no," Miller repeated, stepping forward until he was standing directly over the suitcase, a human shield for his canine partner. "We're not giving her the bag. We're opening it." The room fell silent. Clara let out a choked sob. "You can't. You have no warrant. You have no probable cause." The scan was clear. "My dog is my probable cause," Miller said, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even himself. He looked directly at Henderson, man to man. "I am staking my career on this. On him. If I'm wrong, you can have my badge right now. But we are opening that bag." Henderson stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He saw the unwavering loyalty in Miller's eyes, the absolute certainty that defied all logic and evidence. He saw the dog below, a silent testament to an instinct that transcended human understanding. The supervisor looked from the man to the dog, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. What if they were right? What if there was something the multi-million-dollar machine couldn't see? The potential fallout of being wrong was huge, but the potential fallout of ignoring a genuine threat, no matter how strange it seemed, was infinitely worse. He ran a hand over his tired face, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the hum of the machines and Clara's ragged, desperate breathing. Finally, Henderson let out a long, weary breath. "Fine," he bit out, the word tasting like defeat. "Bring them to secondary screening room 3. And somebody get a pair of bolt cutters for that lock." He pointed a trembling finger at Miller. "But I swear to God, Miller, if this is for nothing, if you find a half-eaten sandwich in there, I will personally escort you out of this airport for the last time." Clara let out a wail of despair. "No, please, don't. You don't understand. You'll ruin everything." Her pleas were ignored as two agents gently but firmly guided her out of the room and down the hall. Miller knelt beside Max one more time. He didn't need to speak. He just rested his forehead against his dog's, a silent promise passing between them. "I trust you. I'm with you. Let's see this through." Max seemed to understand, letting out a soft huff of air, his body relaxing just a fraction. He finally loosened his jaw, releasing the now mangled plastic handle of the lavender suitcase. He had done his job. He had gotten them to listen. Now it was up to the humans. The private screening room was small, white, and suffocatingly quiet. It felt like a surgical theater. Clara was slumped in a chair in the corner, sobbing quietly into her hands. Henderson stood with his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud of impatience. Miller stood next to the metal table where the suitcase had been placed, with Max sitting faithfully at his feet, panting softly but never taking his eyes off the bag. His work wasn't done. He was here to bear witness. A TSA agent arrived with a pair of bolt cutters and, with a loud snap, severed the small padlock Clara had used. The sound echoed in the silent room. Everyone held their breath. This was it, the moment of truth. Years of partnership, a man's career, and a woman's mysterious desperation all came down to what was inside this ordinary-looking suitcase. "Go ahead," Henderson said, his voice flat. The agent took a deep breath and placed his hands on the two zippers. He pulled them slowly, the rasping sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He lifted the lid. For a moment, all they saw was exactly what Clara had claimed, exactly what the X-ray had shown. A pile of neatly folded clothes. A blue cashmere sweater lay on top, beside a stack of t-shirts and a pair of jeans. A faint, almost imperceptible smell, like a nursery, drifted into the air. Henderson let out a short, bitter laugh. "Clothes. It's just clothes. I knew it." He turned a furious glare on Miller. "You are finished, officer. Absolutely fin." But he stopped mid-sentence. Because the blue cashmere sweater had moved. It was just a tiny ripple, a slight undulation in the fabric, so small that they might have missed it if the room hadn't been so deathly still. Max saw it too. He stood up, his tail giving a single, tentative thump against Miller's leg, and he let out the softest whine yet. It was a sound of encouragement, of hope. The agent, his eyes wide, slowly reached out a trembling hand. He hesitated for a second, then gently, carefully, he lifted the corner of the sweater. And the entire world stopped. Nestled in a hollowed-out space surrounded by soft fabrics was a puppy. A tiny, perfect, golden retriever puppy, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old. Its fur was the color of spun gold, its eyes were squeezed shut, and its tiny chest was barely moving. It was shivering violently, its breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. A small, empty nursing bottle lay beside its head, and the clothes around it were damp. For a full 10 seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The only sound was the puppy's faint, wheezing breaths and Clara's broken, heart-wrenching sobs. The truth, when it finally came, was more shocking and more tragic than anyone could have possibly imagined. Max hadn't smelled a bomb. He hadn't smelled drugs. He had smelled life. Precious, innocent, fading life. He had heard the silent screams of a creature that was suffocating, a sound so high-pitched and faint that it was completely beyond the range of human hearing. He hadn't been attacking the bag. He had been performing a rescue. He was trying to save the tiny, beating heart inside. Henderson stared, his face ashen. He looked from the puppy to Max, and the skepticism and anger in his eyes melted away, replaced by a look of profound, humbled awe. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He simply shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Miller dropped to his knees, ignoring the protocol, ignoring the other people in the room, and wrapped his arms around Max's neck, burying his face deep into his partner's fur. The emotions he'd been holding back, the fear, the doubt, the stress, all came pouring out in a single, choked sob. "You knew," he whispered into Max's ear, his voice thick. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy? You're such a good boy." Max licked his face, his tail now wagging furiously, his duty done, his message finally understood. The story came tumbling out of Clara between gasps and sobs. Her 9-year-old son, Leo, was in a hospital 3,000 miles away, in the final stages of a battle with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. His one last wish, the one thing he talked about endlessly, the one dream that gave him a reason to fight through another day of painful treatments, was to have a puppy from a specific, champion bloodline his father had once owned. It was a link to a healthier, happier past. Clara had found the last available puppy from that litter, but the breeder, following regulations, refused to ship a puppy so young. Desperate, running out of time, and fueled by a mother's fierce, irrational love, Clara made a terrible decision. She bought the puppy, packed it into the suitcase with a small bottle and a breathing hole she thought was adequate, and decided to smuggle it onto the plane. She didn't know about the lack of oxygen, the terrifying pressure changes, the freezing temperatures in an unheated cargo hold. In her mind, she wasn't a criminal. She was a mother trying to grant her dying child's last wish. She was willing to risk everything for one last smile on her son's face. "I didn't know," she cried, her body racked with guilt. "I swear I didn't know it would hurt him. I just wanted my baby to be happy." In that moment, the entire dynamic in the room shifted. There were no cops and suspects, no rule breakers and enforcers. There were just human beings, caught in a devastatingly tragic situation. Henderson, the by-the-book supervisor, was the first to act. He got on his radio, his voice urgent but compassionate. "Get me airport paramedics and a veterinary contact now. We have a medical emergency in Secondary 3. A puppy, hypoxic and dehydrated." What happened next was a miracle of human kindness. The rigid bureaucracy of the airport melted away. Paramedics arrived and, using a pediatric oxygen mask, began stabilizing the tiny creature. An on-call vet, who normally dealt with international animal shipments, rushed to the scene. Clara wasn't arrested or charged. Instead, Henderson personally escorted her to a quiet lounge, got her a cup of tea, and listened to her story, assuring her that they would do everything they could to help. The puppy, who Clara had named Sunshine for her son, was weak but resilient. After a few hours of oxygen, fluids, and warmth, he began to stir, his tail giving a weak but defiant thump. The vet declared him stable enough for travel, but not in a suitcase. Word of the story spread like wildfire through the airport staff. The gate agent for Clara's flight heard about it, then the pilot, then the airline's corporate office. Moved by the incredible story of Max's intuition and Clara's desperate love for her son, the airline did something extraordinary. They upgraded Clara to a first-class seat so she and Sunshine, now nestled safely in a proper carrier on her lap, could travel in comfort. The flight crew treated the puppy like a VIP, and passengers, having heard the story, offered quiet words of support and encouragement as she boarded. Hours later, after his shift had ended, Miller drove Max to their favorite spot, a quiet, grassy hill that overlooked the runways. They sat together in the twilight, watching the planes take off, silver birds soaring into the purple sky. Miller had his arm draped over Max's back, his fingers rhythmically scratching behind his ears. The commendation from Henderson was already on his desk. The story was already becoming a legend among the K-9 units. But none of that mattered. What mattered was this moment. The quiet understanding, the unspoken bond. Max had reminded them all of a profound truth that day, that the world is filled with things our eyes cannot see and our ears cannot hear. That sometimes, the most sophisticated technology is no match for the purity of an animal's instinct. And that the greatest courage is not in following orders, but in trusting your heart, especially when it beats inside the chest of your best friend. Miller looked down at his partner, who rested his noble head on his knee, his amber eyes soft in the fading light. "You saved 2 lives today, you know that?" he said softly. "You saved that little pup. And you saved that little boy's last wish." Max just looked up at him, his tail thumping against the cool grass, a silent acknowledgement of a job well done. They stayed there for a long time, just a man and his dog, 2 heroes watching over their city as the first stars began to appear in the night sky. The world can be a loud, confusing place. But if we just stop and listen, really listen, we might hear the whispers of the angels among us. And sometimes, those angels have 4 paws and a wet nose. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories just like this one.